Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so to continue, I'm going to read just another little section from Brave, Generous, and Undefended. And then we're going to move into modes of practice. The karmic seed of cause is in the mind as a single thought or emotion, positive or negative, forming and dissolving moment by moment, and most of the time by habit of unawareness, not consciously recognized. Though our thoughts and emotions may be fleeting, subtle, and at present difficult to discern, in fact, we can perceive all that displays in our mind, and we can train to recognize our harmful thoughts and emotions in the very instant of their arising. Our ordinary mental, emotional, behavioral patterns function as vectors for karmic formation. The most important of these is our conditioned mind. We react to our mind's activity in three principal ways, so habitual as to be almost indiscernible, until we learn to see their action through cultivating the inward attention, mind looking at mind. We've been considering these three habitual patterns already as the three poisons or three principal afflictive emotions, variously identified as attraction, aversion, confusion, or as grasping, repulsing, elaborating, or as passion, aggression, jealousy. Simply put, I want it, I hate it, I'm confused about it, so I'll make something up. These three reactions arise from our mental patterns of self-reference and self-concern as we are reflexively reacting to stimuli in terms of their imagined relationship to the imagined self. It is in that instant of reaction that karmic cause is set. This is why it matters that we become able to recognize our mental phenomena, our thoughts and emotions, as soon as they arise. In the moment mind recognizes a thought and does not interfere with it, the thought vanishes, leaving no trace. Thought nature and mind nature, same nature. When a thought or emotion arises in our mind, is recognized, and meets with no reaction or involvement at all, it goes as naturally as it came, like a wave in water, coming and going in its own watery nature. So the three poisons naturally point us to their own three antidotes. Grasp at nothing, neither push anything away, and no elaboration. If you like it, let it go. If you dislike it, let it go. And if you don't know whether it's desirable or detestable, let it go. Let it go means leave it alone, don't engage. Easier said than done, right? As we all know who've been trying to work with this. We have a Sangha friend who calls it a slippery melon. So leaving it alone, not engaging, requires that we learn, oh, please listen carefully to this, requires that we learn to tolerate the instant of recognizing a reaction, simply to be with it, without claiming it, rejecting it, or making it into something. We can train through practice in this method that liberates seeds of harm-doing from their potential to harm. The person who can abandon the impulse to harm others is the one who can recognize that impulse and disarm it. So there are many different kinds of meditative practice. The ones we work with here at this time are those in which we cultivate the inward attention that allows us to see clearly what's arising in the mind. The beginnings of that are laid down in the calm abiding practice and practices of that kind, like the one that we did yesterday and that we practiced together yesterday evening, where you don't think necessarily that you're looking at your mind, but you are, because when moments arise in which you recognize you've strayed from a clear focus simply on the breath, that simple instruction to be aware of the breathing, lightly focused on the out breath only, you can be thinking, well, that's so easy, and that's boring. Anybody can, count their breaths, or be aware of their in-breath and their out-breath, but also anybody can stray from that in an instant. And 10 minutes may go by where you were completely doing something else. The moment that you recognize that, that's awareness, that recognizing faculty of mind. And the moment that you recognize that you've strayed, you're back. Not back, but in the sense, you're there again, attentive and awake to what's happening in your mind. So I call the methods that help us develop this capacity, which is our natural capacity of mind. It's always happening, but we want to develop it intentionally, the inward attention. I call these awareness practices. There are many different kinds, but they all rely on the fact that we have the natural ability to see our mind. And to see our mind means seeing both the conventional mind that is habituated and reacting to stimuli that in the way it always does, yada, 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 and the mind itself, the nature of the mind. The conditioned mind is relative reality mind. The true nature is the absolute. They are inseparable. There isn't one single moment of your craziest thinking or most wild and disastrous emotional display inwardly. There's not one moment of this that is, for even an instant, separate from its actual nature, which is uncreated and undying, always already there, unmoving and unchanging. That is what sees the this. The thises and the that's that we're contending with are seen in every instant by the that is the absolute nature, our true nature. So as we cultivate the inward attention, what we're cultivating is the capacity of our mind to recognize both the conventional, habituated, crazy mind, sometimes called the monkey mind, and the mind that recognizes it. Sometimes I use the expression, we're cultivating the inward attention that will allow us to look through the conditioned mind to the essence of mind itself. I don't know that we're actually looking through anything. Machik Labdran, the deity pictured here. Oh, you can't see. You're No. Machik said she a 12th century teacher who was the originator of the or who brought the lineage of Chud forward. She said, when mind looks at mind, thoughts cease. She said that was her last teaching. So let's take that. When mind looks at mind, thoughts cease. But don't aim for the cessation of thought. Many people, want to attain the state of direct perception of emptiness, and you will, gradually, probably, some people directly. But it can easily become something that one's striving for. And striving for direct perception of the absolute is usually going to be somewhat mixed with self-grasping. And that's what hides the absolute from our seeking eyes, our seeking inward eyes. So when we hear the thought of thoughts ceasing and we have a direct experience of how that is a very blissful state, when the mind is free of thought, even for a moment, don't then grab that as a goal. That's like pushing it away. Instead, we practice to recognize the arising in the mind in the moment of its arising. And when we see that, that arising dissolves. So it's the recognizing capacity of mind that we're wanting to strengthen, not any thought of freeing the mind from thoughts or chasing after emptiness. Okay? So there's a taste of that often with calm abiding practice, experienced as clarity. The breath is a very good discipline for working with that. Even so, in that kind of practice, it is still the clarity aspect that is able to tell you when momentarily you've lost your attentiveness to how you were practicing. And so when you see that in a given moment, recognize and rest in the clarity. It's that simple. So when clarity shows you confusion, you don't have to then go try to get involved with the confusion to dissipate it in some way. That's more like grasping hold of it. So clarity recognizes confusion. You rest in the clarity, just for an instant. It may be, an instant that's quite lengthy, but it may just be literally like an instant and then gone again. But your capacity to rest in that is simply your resting, just like that. Cultivating that eye that sees within. And then clickety, 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 the whole thing starts up again. And then you recognize that. Let me speak to the 3 moments in the life cycle of a thought or a mental arising, a namtok. There's this, if we look at a bell, I've spoken about this before, but I think it bears repeating. It helps me to think of it over and over again. So you know what a bell curve looks like. There's the flat plane, and then there's this gradually arising curved shape that looks like a bell. So at any point along that continuum, you can recognize an arising in the mind. Or you can recognize a mental phenomenon, whether it be an actual thought or emotions or memory or desire or registration of a bodily feeling. The most powerful moment for you, for us as practitioners, is we simply glance within and we recognize that there is something that is beginning to nudge our conscious awareness, our consciousness. And as you can discern that, at that moment, if you can simply rest with that discernment, that's clarity, recognizing consciousness, a movement in consciousness. And then that particular thought form, when seen in that way, will not continue to develop in the mind. So whatever the karmic load was for that thought form, that has dissipated before becoming activated in your karmic stream, depending on how early you catch it. Let it go even a little bit, and there is a little bit of karmic involvement. I'm not expert enough to talk about that in any more detail, except to simply say that part. It's also true, though, that as that bell curve rises, and the arising in the mind continues to develop, any point along that continuum of the arising or the moment when it's right there, or the moment when it starts to dissipate, go down the other slope of the bell curve, any of those moments is potent for recognition and therefore potent for liberation. And when we're talking about recognition and liberation being simultaneous, it applies even in the case of one of your little thought forms that's beginning to arise in your mind, maybe a habitual thought of some sort, or an annoyance, or whatever it may be. The recognition of that, the mind of awareness recognizing that event taking shape within the mind stream, at any moment along the cycle of its arising, abiding, and dissipating, the recognition of it is its liberation. We're talking then about the liberation of that thought form, or that potential karmic cause. It has been liberated by awareness, recognizing it. So in the Bardo, when Padmasambhava says recognition and liberation are simultaneous, it's the same process he's talking about. But in the Bardo experience after death, talking about preventing taking another life form, instead awaking to full liberation. It's the same process, though. When you're presented with many visions and images in the Bardo of Dharmata after dying, according to the teachings on the Bardo. Some of them are frightening, some of them are very beautiful and peaceful. And the instruction is recognize them as your own mind's contents projected out as appearances that then appear to you as being something outside you, but they are projections of your own mind. They're the play of your own mind. And to recognize them, one of the phrases that's used in one of the instructions in the peaceful deities is that you say to that deity that you're experiencing as a vision, I recognize that you are really the form of my own deity, my own, beloved deity. I take refuge in you. So that's the form in which it's expressed in that particular teaching. But that's the moment of recognition, that you recognize that image as an experience of your own mind that you have had in your lifetime, and now here it is experienced again in after death time, but you recognize it. In that moment, you're one with it. And in the POA instructions for transferring consciousness at the time of death, one of the instructions in the POA that I have from Rinpoche is that the mind melts into it, just like water pouring into water merges with space, with great, vast, limitless, luminous space, which is the absolute, the Dharmakaya. So that image of water flowing into water is a very powerful image for us to work with as we look at how to be with our active mind process as we wish not to continue to create undesirable karmic consequences for ourselves that also, of course, impact others. And I spoke about that moment of tolerating what's arising in the mind, with not engaging with it. Tolerating not engaging with it is the first thing, which is the not doing, which Rinpoche has said over and over again. That's the hardest thing you'll ever do, is not to do something. So we tolerate not engaging. We tolerate being with, without engaging, without becoming involved, without feeding, without elaborating and further development of a specific arising in the mind, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever we're registering in the mind, in the consciousness. To be with without engaging is to allow that thought form to liberate, to self-liberate. These are the dynamics of presence. That's what I want us to talk about next. The dynamics of presence, what presence means. We can talk about taking full responsibility for our the karma that we sow. I hope that it's coming clear that that means both becoming conscious of and taking full responsibility for our mind. I hope that that's becoming clear in what I've said so far. And it points to the critical role of what I am calling the inward attention. Because it is that inner seeing, that inner vision, that allows us to see the process of our mind, our consciousness. And that inner sense of vision is not other than mind's natural clarity, always available. It becomes more difficult with dementia, but there are still instructions that can be given for how to work with one's own mind in dementia as well. Some other time, perhaps we can go there. I don't have a great deal of detail about it, but it is something I've discussed with Rinpoche. So, there's a practice that I've never given publicly before. The seed of that practice was planted in my mind by the first teacher I worked with formally on the spiritual path in this lifetime, whom I've mentioned before, Venerable Dahani Iwahu. And she called it the non-grasping practice. It's very powerful as a way of working with the grasping tendency of mind. And but over many, many years, it's also, for me, developed in some other ways as well. And I have called it over some years the secret practice, because it is entirely secret and inner. It's not secret in that you can't tell anybody about it. It's just secret in that you practice it it's a profoundly inner practice. Recently I've begun thinking of it as the practice of radical presence. Radical meaning root. That's what radical means. That's where the word radish comes from. Root. Root presence means absolute presence, not other than our true nature presence. It's not something that we cultivate, it already is. We already are that. What we cultivate is our ability to recognize it and to rest in it, to abide in it. And let me see how I want to take the next step here with you. I want to say something about this form of practice that touched me very much in this last year. I've had for many years, maybe, I don't even know how many years, maybe 15 years or more, a particular student who is very engaged in the material world, very engaged with material reality. She was a scientist, and her work was to work with earth functions as a scientist. And she had also a vivid longing for right relationship in every way that we might think of right relationship with self and others and with the entire co-created universe that we recognize as our world. And as a part of that arose spiritual hunger and intention. And she stepped onto the Bodhisattva path. And she was very receptive to everything she received. She was discerning, but very receptive, like her beloved Mother Earth, open to receive the life-giving rains. But a form of practice was not what she wanted or was looking for. She wanted essence practice that she could just recognize in every moment as being a way to be in the world. That would be her practice. And she particularly wanted a practice that would be powerful for her in dealing with her strong, and I have to say beautiful, but also challenging for her strong tendency towards attachment. Very vivid in her attachments. Just, her attachments were wonderful to watch. They were very vivid and brightly colored and wonderful shapes and forms and sounds and tastes. So she was the first person I gave the secret practice to. And she drank it like water. She took it in, and she never stopped practicing it from then until the end of her life in October. It just became the way she inhabited reality, both material and mental. And as she lay dying for some months in another country, and we were communicating very amusingly and also very profoundly at times over WhatsApp, a marvelous direct video connection. As she became more and more sick and it became more and more difficult for her to function, we stayed in very close contact in this way for months. And I think up until probably the day before her death, she was able to do the secret practice. It had become so much a part of her, it was like breathing. And so she was still breathing, so she was still practicing. And it gave me such a sense of gratitude for having received this seed from a former teacher of mine and being able to pass that seed to a student of mine, that I now want to share it more widely, and I'm very happy that we're here together to do that. Some of you have already received elements of this practice. So let me speak first to a kind of a visual image of how we can think of one aspect, or two aspects really, of consciousness, or of being and existence, let me say, to be more precise. Imagine that there's a vertical dimension to our experiencing and a horizontal dimension to our experiencing. And the vertical dimension is, when you think of lineage, you know, and in our tradition, we're very strongly identified with the power and of untrammeled and uncontrived truth that moves to us through lineages of centuries of practitioners, and then empowerments that actually open our continuum to receive the blessings and the wisdom of these lineage teachings and practices. So I think of this vertical dimension in that way as the blessings are always flowing down to us, right? Always there. And what needs to happen for us to receive them is that through our upward longing, the lotus at the crown of the head opens and blessings pour in. I mean, this is a kind of mechanical description of something that's very much a vivid process when we're living it. I don't want to break it up into steps, but I want to make it visible with this kind of a description. So imagine then that a stream of blessings is flowing down to us all the time, and a stream of devotion and longing, spiritual longing, is flowing upward, that there's a natural flow for us as beings in existence, and it's the flow of the absolute and the relative. And they're meeting at the heart. And then, so just imagine, this isn't a visualization you have to hold on to, but it's just an opening of an eye to see in a certain way the way our energies can interact as we co-create the world. So there's this vertical dimension with the upward and downward flow of devotion and love, both ways, longing arising and blessings descending, and then at the heart center, we can imagine a horizontal dimension. This is us in the world, yes? And out along the axis, the horizontal axis, this is the axis of the Bodhisattva, activating absolute love and absolute wisdom in the world for the benefit of beings, in the worlds, all the worlds. So that's not a visualization that you need to hold particularly, but I find myself greatly benefited by that schematic, and I want to say why, because it will lead us into the practice. We need both insight and stability. We can have insight, a moment of insight or an extended time of insight into the true nature of reality, into the true nature of ourselves and all phenomena. And from that moment on, our work as practitioners is to familiarize ourselves with and stabilize that state, not by grasping for it or trying to repeat it or create even the circumstances in which we first experienced it, but clearing away with the power of love, clearing away all that is in the way of our being able to see without preconception. We are obscured by our grasping. We're obscured by our attachment. We're obscured by our confusion and our ignorance. We're obscured by our negativity and hatred. This is all to be swept away by the clear, I call it the new broom that sweeps clean, the spiritual practice. That's the work of the practitioner, to clear away what's between us and the clear seeing of what is. That's the only work we really have to do, and it's the work of love. It's love active in the world, clearing away for ourselves and others. That's what opens the inner eye to see fully and without obscuration. So this schematic that I just outlined, this vertical and horizontal dimensions, it's kind of like, do you know what a compass rose is? Have you ever heard that phrase? In the whole the cabin of a ship, the captain's wheelhouse. In the old ships, I think they still use them, but I don't know that they're used in the way they used to be, but they're symbolic of so much that I think they're still in many wheelhouses. There's a glass enclosed compartment in which there is suspended a compass, probably made out of brass. And I don't remember why it's called a compass rose, but we can Google that later. The compass, of course, turns with every shift in direction, however minute. There's a movement of the compass that reflects your relationship to true north. Think of true north as true you, the actual nature, the true nature of beings and phenomena, the true nature of reality. Think of that as true north. And think of this schematic, this horizontal, vertical schematic, as being our compass rose, that we can gather our energies within and stabilize in our intention and in our attention. So it's not a visualization to hold, but just a little mnemonic device, yes? Okay. You can hold the visualization if you want. I mean, I periodically pull myself right in there and I'm stable. So that's what I want to share with you. Are you feeling that? Yeah. It's a powerful image. So you'll see in a minute why I call this the dynamics of presence, the practice that we're about to do. So I'm just going to speak through this practice for you, and I'll move slowly so that you can really be with each of the steps of the practice. Remember that we're working here with subtle energies. We're not working here with the gross energies of appetite and of the physical body. Particularly, we're working with the awareness that sees them. So, gathering within. Begin with 3 full breaths. And the 3 full breaths begin with an exhale. Wherever you are in your breathing cycle, let yourself come to a point where you're ready to exhale. And then do a complete exhale. I find it helpful to make the sound S as I do that exhale, because it tells me how far I've gone. So we want to go as far as we can with our exhalation, and only as it can go no further do you simply, suddenly let go. And the body then, on its own, inhales. And there is a way of going all the way with your exhale, as far as you can, that at the moment when you, and you'll see me demonstrating this, that at the moment when you think you cannot exhale any further, and you're still making that sound, you push it just a little further until really that's it. And then you just let go because you have no choice, you have to. And then the body naturally takes the next inhalation. We don't need to breathe. Earth and sky are breathing through us. It's not something that we have to do unless we have a lung impairment. If we have respiratory problems, then we need to focus and pay attention to our breathing. Otherwise, it's happening through us. We're not creating it. And when we no longer have it, the body just naturally falls to the ground. This breath is literally the breath of life, and it's what in some usages is called spirit. When it's no longer there, we're gone. But as long as it's here, we can practice radical presence. So let's do this. We're going to do 3 rounds of this complete exhalation, and I will be making that sound, and I invite you to do the same. Making the sound really shows us where we are with our breath. Okay? You can also do a natural exhale without that after you do the full exhale. And then you start again with another complete exhale. Can you hear the sound? Okay. Now just breathe naturally, a few rounds. Now, simply and easily and naturally, draw yourself, gather yourself into the very center of your being. No visualization needed. Simply gather yourself, your essence of you, in the center. And you may sense or feel that you find yourself in an energy channel of some sort, in a channel where there's a flow of your essence with natural wisdom. It's not necessarily moving, but it's not static. So now glance within with your inner vision, inward attention. Glance within to where you are gathered, swiftly, just for an instant. Now, having glanced within, gaze within. Rest your inward attention within, where your essence recognizes itself. It's an open, soft gaze with the eyes open. You're seeing and sensing. You're using vision and consciousness. Whole body seeing, sensing the dynamic display within and without. Sensing, gazing within to where your essence is gathered and naturally abides. Rest here, stabilizing. Now sense this place where your awareness is abiding. Sense this as a wisdom channel. You don't have to give it a particular form. Just sense it as the place of wisdom channel where wisdom abides and flows. If you want to sense it in a particular placement within the body, it would be in front of the spine slightly. It's a very subtle energy, a channel. Now we're going to practice drawing and releasing. If there is any form or sensation of grasping or pushing away, draw it into this wisdom channel. If there's any subtle confusion or uncertainty or emotional or mental affliction, even the slightest little indicator of such, just with the natural breathing and the natural movement of your own mind's awareness, allow it to come into this wisdom channel in the center of the body. And sense or see or just feel or experience how that even that most subtle perturbation of energy, that most subtle movement of mind dissolves like water melting into water in the wisdom channel. Becoming one with the light and energy of absolute wisdom. All confusion reveals its nature as wisdom itself. These practices, called radical presence or the secret practice, are taken with appreciation for the dynamic display of appearances, phenomena, experiences, feelings, body states, emotions, vivid natural prowess and play of mind and life force, and within knowledge of emptiness, the void nature of all appearances, having no solidity of their own, no intrinsic existence, and yet vividly, powerfully, beautifully as displaying as our experience in life. And these practices that are contained within this that we've just experienced together, we are experiencing the dynamic energy of emptiness. Emptiness is not a blank nothing. It is also described by Longchenpa as having dynamic energy. We participate in that. We are that. And all grasping, which obscures that truth, releases into the light of natural wisdom, naturally radiant, naturally pervading, no action required. This is a practice of non-doing, of allowing, of inviting, of recognizing. So the steps, I'm just going to enumerate them, are to gather, to glance, to gaze, to rest. And in the resting, we abide, we naturally radiate, we just be. I would like to invite you to take that practice in, that collection of small practices that make up the secret practice or the practice of radical presence, to take what you've been given orally in this giving, and to practice of it what you remember naturally and what it seems most vivid and accessible and meaningful to you. You don't need to try to remember all the steps, because they're not really steps. It's a natural unfolding. You will have, of course, access to the video by which you can refresh your memory. But the point is to experience directly. And for myself, one of the ways that it's most helpful in an immediate sense in the life lived in the world, particularly in circumstances that are trying or challenging, is how stabilizing it is to draw oneself into the center of one's being. Just that simple gesture of mind, just within. And there's a stilling and stabilizing that occur quite naturally with just simply that gesture of glancing within. I just want to invite you to just experience that and allow yourself to have access to that whenever you want, moment to moment to moment. You know that one of the ways we describe the way I teach is awareness practice. I call it between the refrigerator and the stove. That in any circumstance of ordinary life, however challenging or however mundane, with just a moment like this, you draw within. And as you practice that between the refrigerator and the stove, or between the daycare and the wedding party, however extended the moment is in your life, as you practice that over and over again, it becomes a natural movement of awareness. And we can go further with it as time allows, at various times when we can gather and meet in this way or in person. This is one of my heart practices that I have been doing in one way or another ever since I first received it from that excellent teacher. Sometimes I think she developed that practice just for me because I had so much grasping and still do. It's really profound way to engage yourself for the benefit of all beings. Can you experience, I'm sure that we're experiencing the same thing, because here we are together. There is a deep quietude here at this time. There may be stuff moving around inside in your mind or your awareness or your body, and it's moving around in the deep quietude. We are not separate from that. We're not ever separate from the peace that we long to experience and embody for others. We're not separate from the absolute love that reaches out along the horizontal dimension to the world. And we're not separate ever for an instant from our true nature. So when we accept the invitation to gather ourselves within, to gather ourselves, our essence, to the place of essence, that's where we're going. Nowhere, we're not going anywhere, but that's where we're abiding. It's where we're inviting ourselves to just be what we are. Thank you. We have a few more minutes before it's time to end for our lunch. We have received a couple of questions. So let's shift gears, take a look and see what we've got. Dear Barbara, thank you very much for your precious advices and insights. I liked the idea you mentioned yesterday, allowing a new thought to arise instead of rethinking our usual thoughts. All of a sudden, I discovered the thought of being allowed to be happy. It feels fragile and good. How do you use this practice in the best way? Well, I think you use it in the best way. I think that's amazing that you discovered the thought of being allowed to be happy. I would say, when I read that the phrase being allowed to be happy suggests that maybe you can work along that edge a little bit more. It feels fragile and good, but it's not fragile. It's actually very powerful, as you're experiencing. Play with the thought of being allowed to be happy and what that's like, and then play with the thought, I am happy. I am happy. And let those two thoughts play with each other, and then see what happens. Okay? I'm happy for you, for all of us. And I particularly appreciate you mentioning this, thinking a new thought. I'd completely forgotten about having spoken of that yesterday. It's really delightful to have a new thought. Oh. Oh. This is a little love letter. I think I'll read it. Is it okay? The person who sent me this, I said, I'm going to read this out loud, because this is how, I'll put it last. Let's read the ones that are asking a question first. This is so beautiful. I want to share it with you. Okay. I have two questions. Both have to do with people who are not on the Buddhist path. The first is, weeks before dying, a person seems to be going between, clearly a person that this person is observing, a person seems to be going between periods of sanity and insanity. In moments of lucidity, they talk about the visual and auditory experiences they're having, and as they sleep through their gestures, you're aware they're dreaming and can sense the fear and suffering they're going through. Does this mean they're experiencing the Bardo while still alive? If so, is there any benefit to them? No, they're not experiencing the Bardo between death and rebirth while they're alive. They're experiencing the Bardo of the moment before death. In that moment, the elements of the body, the subtle elements and the gross elements, are shifting and falling into their essence, is the way I would describe it. And their reflections in the mind's experience can be disturbing. The experience of groundlessness, for example, when earth element dissolves, it's no longer you no longer have any solidity. When fire element dissolves, the heat of the body retracts, and so on. So there are disturbances that are a natural part of the process of dying in a physical body. There's nothing wrong and the body has an orderly process that it goes through naturally. We don't have to create that or do anything with it or about it. Sometimes people want to be comforting to the person who's dying by reassuring them that everything is orderly and moving in the right way. Sometimes if the person has been frightened about the possibility of dying and there hasn't been real conversation about it before. Do you remember what I read to you yesterday about Trungpa Rinpoche saying it's to be able to have a true meeting with somebody really in bare honesty that they are dying can be a great gift, And then also we can remind our friend or our relative or the person that we're with as they're moving towards dying of whatever spiritual practice or spiritual faith they had confidence in during their lifetime. It doesn't have to be our tradition. It can be whatever one is meaningful to them. For example, when my mother died, I had been with her before she died, and then I was back on the other side of the country again, and I was given the instruction to make prayers for her in the tradition that had the most meaning for me, but that she would receive them in the forms most meaningful to her. So the other part of this friend's question says, how can one be of benefit to a person who's a devout Catholic who's going through the loss of their spouse? So let's just speak for a moment of working with somebody or being present with somebody who's in the dying process and they're of a different tradition. You don't need to worry about that. But while they're alive still and still have the hearing faculty, I don't usually speak I don't usually use imagery or speak in terms that might be confusing or unsettling or disturbing to that person's mind that wants to grasp to what is familiar and dear. So I'm just mindful about that. But the hearing continues after the loss of consciousness. So at a certain point, it's really all okay. It's okay. If when we speak truth, people hear the truth. Like I've had the experience sitting in this very temple with teachers who have been speaking in their own language, in Tibetan in the case here, and people received the teachings in the language that was their language. That's really amazing, actually. I mean, very often you'll hear somebody say they received the teaching that, as if it were meant just directly for them, but to have it come in their own language, that to me gives great confidence that at the time that someone's dying, they're wanting guidance for the truth, and that's the truth that they're listening for, not what language it's being given in. So you can have confidence there, I think. In terms of the first question spoke of how we can be aware that the dying person is dreaming and we can sense their fear and suffering. Don't fixate to that. Be aware of it and have your natural compassionate response of caring that you want to assuage their suffering and fear and so on. But don't fixate to their emotional experience. It's very fleeting. It's very fleeting. It's not solid. It's not. It's a process, a natural process, any more than we want to fixate to our own fear and suffering when we're experiencing it in life. The same thing with the person who's dying. You want to be a calm presence. You want your own state of mind to be very stable and very clear. That's what gives the greatest comfort to your friend who's dying. Your stability, your clarity, and your love. That's the great stabilizer. So how can one be of benefit to a person who's a devout Catholic go through the loss of their spouse? Well, I don't know why it would be an issue what the person's religion was. Grief is grief. Loss is loss. We all know what grief and loss are. We all know the terrible pain of losing someone that we love. We all know that. We've all had experiences like that throughout our lifetime. Even a little child who's hardly lived any years on the earth has had some experiences already of grief and loss. We all know that. And the greatest benefit I think we can be to a person who's experiencing that is simply to be present. That's another form of an act of radical presence, to be fully present with your friend who's suffering. You don't have to have expertise, you don't have to have a method, you don't have to have a religious practice. What you have is love and compassion, and you, in that state, become present with your friend who's suffering. Very few words need to be spoken. You know, I myself tend to make the mistake of saying too much, thinking there's something I need to do. But people have shown me over many years, you know, I'm dying, you don't have to get busy about it. Actually, somebody actually said that to me. It was great. What a teaching. Barbara, get over yourself. I'm dying. You don't need to do anything about it. It's great. I love those teachings that come right in the moment, you know, cutting right through all the stuff. So the person whose spouse has died has lost a dear one, a partner in life, and has lost, therefore, also the life that they shared with that person going forward is not going to happen. So they've lost a future that they may have been looking forward to and counting on, but they haven't lost the person's love. They haven't lost their love. They haven't lost that vital element of relationship, which is recognition and love. That doesn't go away. You don't lose a relationship because someone dies. You can still communicate, and you can still love. The most important thing to remember and to remind your friends is still love. Don't put a cap on the loving. Let the love free. That's what it is. It's the next expression of love in that relationship. That's how love is expressing itself in the time of loss, by grief. And grief is like love. It can be a mighty river. It can take you with it. You know, you just endure grief the same way you adore love. You would endure grief. So there isn't a formula. But if there were one, I would call it love. So. This is a question I received last night. I'm dealing with a baseline conditioning that says I'm worthless without the external validation of a loving partner. And regardless of how much my mind says it's not true, or how many times I stop identifying with mind structures altogether, now there's an accomplishment. When I come to act in the world, it still activates and interferes with maintaining the flow of presence. Well, I think you have to partner yourself here. We can't count on there being another human being or another sentient being to be a loving partner for us. That's not something we can create. If we have created the cause for that karmically, that will happen. If we have not, it will not. So that eventuality has been decided already a long time ago. What we can do is increase our receptivity and our availability to love. For that, we have to have receptor sites. Somebody could love us up one side and down the other, and it would not even work for us to recognize it as love if our love receptor sites weren't well activated, functioning at a high level. That's not a phrase we usually associate with love, receptor sites, but if we're not open to love, we won't receive it when it comes. No matter how much we may be longing for it, thirsting for it, starving for it, if there is a thought of not worthy, it is very hard for love to penetrate. It's very hard for love to come in, although that's only at the level of our conscious receptivity. There is no obstacle to love at all. It's just in terms of our conscious awareness of being loved and receiving love and accepting love and reciprocating love that we can have blockages. And they all have to do with self-grasping. So the idea of oneself as worthy of love, if one grasps at that, that's a blockage. If it's I'm not worthy of love, that's a blockage. If you're not worthy of love, you'll reject it when it comes your way. But it's still coming your way. You're still receiving the love, but you're not going to participate in it consciously and wholeheartedly. If you think you're not worthy, you'll be pushing back. So the work is with one's own mind, as you know, as you recognize from the way you wrote this. The work is with your mind. The way I worked with thinking I wasn't worthy of love, and it still comes up sometimes for me, is I work with giving myself love. And it sounds a little funny, but I started working. I love this memory. It was many years ago. I realized that I engaged in harsh speech towards myself when I was hurting. Like if I felt I had lots of injuries as a young person and child, and every time I would hurt myself or suffer injury, I would be critical of myself about it. Well, now, that's not very loving and compassionate, right? It's obvious now, right? But I would even rip out tidal waves of swearing and cuss words at myself when I would, sprain an ankle and fall down in the dirt or whatever. And so the place that I intervened to start making a shift when I realized that I was engaging in activity towards myself that was really not loving, and so therefore how could my partner possibly get through to me? I started speaking to myself the way a loving person would speak to a person who was hurt or who had hurt herself. So I said things like, "Oh, Barbara, I'm so sorry that happened to you." Or, "Oh, Barbara, I'm so sorry that you did that to yourself. You don't need to hurt yourself like that. Let's caress that place that you hurt. Let's touch that in a gentle, loving way. Let's kind of laugh at that stone that tripped you up and toss it off into the bushes, but, not throwing it at somebody and certainly not throwing it at yourself. Barbara, don't call yourself bad names just because you tripped over something and hurt yourself. Instead say, well, I'm so sorry I hurt you, body. I'm so sorry I sprained you, ankle." So I started literally over and over again in one after another strange circumstance of injury or illness or whatever. I spoke to myself in this way. And I can't even tell you when it started to make a change in me, but it was very, very fast. It was very fast and really profound. So now when I hurt myself, because I'm still bumping into things and falling over and so on, that's life and we have physical bodies, what comes immediately is either laughter of, "Oh my gosh, you clumsy kid," or self-talk that is truly loving, adoring, just comforting, consoling, appreciating, reassuring. And I think I was filling up a pitcher that was empty. And Therefore, when I needed to pour out to myself, I had nothing to pour. So I filled up the pitcher. And it has become a self-renewing pitcher. I don't have to fill it anymore. It just naturally fills by itself because I'm no longer separate from love. The negative self-grasping and what looks like positive self-grasping, it's all still self-grasping. So one may have an idea that one's being humble by considering oneself unworthy for love, that there's something about humility there, but just another, it's kind of a distortion of pride. It's still grasping to self. So it's love that dissolves self-grasping. That's the dissolution. It's the universal solvent. So address yourself with words of sincere love and affection and kindness and appreciation. Start giving yourself what you think you're unworthy of receiving. That's the medicine I would prescribe for you. And you can tell I'm speaking from experience. Best wishes. I love you. So now, I've never heard any of my lamas reading something like this aloud in the question and answer period. But I'm going to read it because this person took the time to write it from Germany. Not a person I've met, but I think we're meeting now. Dear Barbara, thank you so much for your very illuminating and inspiring teachings. Well, yes, it's the Buddha Dharma. Even more than your, this is embarrassing, but I'll try to get through it. Even more than your wise and profound words, words of the teachings that I've received from my lamas and from my teachers, yes? Those wise and profound words come to me, and therefore, and because I've listened and paid attention to at least some of them, I've been able to give them to you as well. So I appreciate the gift of your very being. This is, this person's speaking to radical presence, I think. Okay? And it's what I would want for all of us, what this person is saying. You share what you are, what we all are in a way, a mind simple and direct and naked, and at the same time a human being with its very own history of search, suffering, and joy, and that is communicating and resonating in me as your listener far away in Germany in the middle of the night. And I really admire your ability to transport real warmth, affection, and compassion through your gaze in a camera. That's a miracle. You smile in the camera and it goes directly in my mind and heart. This is what I want for us all, that we be able to be fully present, radically present, present at the root with one another, acknowledging, seeing in one another what we want to have seen and acknowledged in us. Our vulnerabilities and faults as human beings, the majesty of our being as beings one with truth and love, the beauty and power of our bodhisattva commitment to love all beings, and the ability to recognize your ability, my German friend, to recognize that naked mind and naked presence in me or someone else means that that's your potential. You wouldn't see that in me or another unless you had the potential for that. And I'll go further and say the longing for that. Because whatever profound and vast and beauteous spiritual potential we have a longing for that to be realized, to be fully developed. That's one of the reasons we're on the path. And we recognize that longing in others. It's one of the reasons we take the bodhisattva path. So this is a beautiful testament to your mind, my friend, to your mind and to the minds of all of us. And I receive it in that way. It's a love letter to our love nature, which is absolutely impossible to separate from truth nature. They are facets of one another. Truth and love, one. Truth and love, one. So thank you for your beautiful words. Okay. Now we get to go eat lunch. Thank you very much. You've been so kind and patient in your presence here today, and I'm speaking into the camera and also to the two warm bodies in the room present. Thank you very much for anchoring us in this wonderful, generous way you have to sit here. And to all of us who are communing through the camera, we'll be back just in a couple of hours. With some more teachings that build on this foundation. This foundation is so subtle that it's funny to call it a foundation, but it's a foundation. And what we're going to be talking about this afternoon are field notes for spiritual warriors in the changing times. Stay tuned.